All right, team. This is a super simple, extra delicious soup. We're working on butternut squash soup. Um, you will look at the recipe for pumpkin soup. I have my butternut squash here, freshly roasted. Um, there is some pictures attached right next to this video. I basically took my half of my squash. I put a little bit of olive oil on it, salt, pepper, flipped it over skin side up, and I cook it at 375, and it took me about 35 minutes or so. How do you know if the squash is done? If we're looking at the squash, this is where the seeds will be. This is the solid piece. This solid part on the top should be fork tender, or if you just want to touch it, just make sure that it's super soft. You should be able to squish it, and the skin should protect it as you're handling it. As you can tell, this pan is I let it cool down just enough to the touch. It's not cold, but it's just cooled down just enough so I can handle it. I have about 2/3 of my stock, and it's almost to a simmer, and I'm actually gonna stop it right there, and I'm going to show you a super easy version of this recipe. Deviates a little bit from the recipe, but not much. Okay, by the way, your butternut squash should be just about 3 cups. If you have a bigger one, then maybe shy a little bit of how much butternut squash we're putting in there, but it should be almost the same. And this is a cream soup, so your recipe doesn't call for cream, but we're going to add a little bit. Okay, we're gonna start the soup by taking our chipotles, and I'm gonna take just one of the chipotles and place it in the liquid. And as I said, I turned it off, so it's warm, but it's not hot because we're gonna blend this, so we don't want it to be too hot so it doesn't expand and try to burn us. Right? Now, I'm only putting one chipotle in here, and then I'll try it later, and if it needs it, then I'll add the other one. But for beginners, we're gonna do one, okay? And then I'm going to take some honey and pour it right here into my pan. And the honey that I send you guys home, maybe about half of it, okay? If you like it really sweet, then do a little bit more, if not a little bit less. But we also have maple syrup, and you have about a half a ramekin, and I'm gonna only do about half of that, about a quarter of this ramekin of maple syrup, right? And then I'm going to continue seasoning this this liquid with a little bit of allspice, just a little tiny pinch, right? It's super strong. We gave you guys a lot of spices, so you can have them. We're gonna use them. We're gonna continue using them later on in the quarter, and even in the next class. But if you're putting whatever you're putting of allspice and cinnamon, you're gonna double that in ginger, and ginger is gonna give this this soup a really nice flavor. Okay, and now I have all my spices in here. I have my chipotle and my honey and my sweeteners, and then I'm gonna take some salt and pour some salt there, and a little bit of pepper. Okay, and then with your squash, if you're able to handle it, it's best, right? I have it with a towel. I'm just gonna take my spoon and scoop this guy out of here and place it in my liquid. Know that the skin is fairly thin, so your squash should be super easy to come out of there, but sometimes your spoon will go through just because the skin is very thin. I'm just gonna put my squash in here, and the idea behind this is regardless if you have a blender at home or a stick blender, I'm gonna use a stick blender today, that we leave this soup fairly thick, and then we will add more liquid if needed. Okay, this is looking really good. I'm going to place my squash back in my pan. I still have a little bit here. I'll show you guys, but it's kind of falling apart, so I just put it back in the pan and just use the spoon to scrape it. Try to not take any of the sugars that came out of the squash and burn in the pan, because obviously they're burnt. They won't make your soup taste very good. But this soup should be one of the quickest soups we make all along, okay? Just try to grab as much as you can from that squash. We're gonna put that in our pot. And now, before we get the pot back on the heat, I have my stick blender here. If you have a stick blender, do it this way. If you have a regular blender, you can put the liquid that's being warmed and everything else in the blender, and then start it slowly and bring it up slowly so your lid doesn't want to pop off with the amount of heat, depending on how hot your liquid is. If you feel like that's too dangerous, then do it with cold liquid, and then when you bring it up to heat in the pot, you have to be very careful and constantly move it so it doesn't stick to the pan, okay? And I'm just gonna tilt my pan a little bit and blend this whole thing. Make sure you get that chipotle in there and blend it too. There we go. I usually try to blend on low, and then once I feel like I have everything ready to go, notice that I'm tilting the pan and I'm tilting the blender as well in an angle without exposing. That's exposing the blade. I'm tilting it in so it doesn't splash me. All right, that's pretty good. Let's get this guy out of the way. Alright, now that our soup is blended, we're going to turn it back on. We're going to check for lumps or big pieces that we miss. You might have some little pieces of the chipotle, and that's perfectly fine. Okay? And we're going to make sure we don't have any debris in there or any little pieces of squash skin that could have got in there. Okay? And then our next step will be to try this. Okay, we're trying it for seasoning and to see if we need to put more spices in here. It's good on the chipotle. It needs a little bit of salt, and I need to touch it a little bit with the other spices. Okay, so I'm gonna put a pinch of salt in there or two, and that'll be good. And I'm gonna put a little bit more ginger in there. I like the ginger in this soup. And a little bit of cinnamon. I'm gonna back off on the allspice and the nutmeg, but I'm going to increase the rest of the maple syrup. It's gonna go in there. And then I'm going to mix it one more time. If you feel like your cinnamon is becoming lumpy in here, you can always use a whisk and whisk this soup. I like working with my spoon. I just try to, anytime that I use spices, I try to do it from further up versus closer to the liquid. So part of it is that they don't lump up. We give them enough space for them to disperse. I got this soup on low. We don't want to, this is going to be a little bit thick, so we don't want the soup to start erupting like a volcano here, and not only making a mess but trying to burn us. Clean up, and then we try it again. It's pretty tasty. Alright, so now I have the soup pretty much coming up to heat. If you feel like your soup is really thick, then we can add more stock. The goal here, or what we're looking for, is that the soup has a little bit of thickness. It coats the back of a spoon. Okay. If I pass my finger on the back of the spoon, you see that it will still leave the trails. I hope you guys can see that. I'll do that one more time. It still leave the trails, but it's not so thick like a chowder or like something that's being thickened by roux. Okay, so now I will take my sour cream, and half of the sour cream is gonna go in the soup. This is part of how we are going to make this soup, cream soup. Okay, now at this point, in order to dissolve that cream in there, we're gonna need a whisk, and I like just placing my whisk right on top of the chunk of sour cream that I put in there and just whisking away. If you see any lumps, the heat will help dissolve them, but you still have to work them. This will calm down the heat a little bit, okay? And it'll also give it a little bit of a tangy flavor, as the squash is fairly rich. Some people will take this soup and they want it a little bit sweeter. If that's the case, feel free to add a little bit of sugar to it. Some people like it a little bit more savory, and they'll leave it just as is. But I wouldn't sweeten it until you taste the soup with the sour cream and the cream in there, okay? Alright, I don't know if you guys can tell, but this kind of changed the color of this soup. I'm going to keep it on low so it doesn't bubble too high. I have sugar right here. I'm going to add a little tiny bit of sugar to this. A couple of pinches is okay. I don't want it to be like sugary pumpkin pie like soup, but I want it to be savory, spicy, and end up with a little bit of sweetness. That milk will help you balance the soup so you can eat over and over, so it's not just a spicy note there. Okay, so I'm gonna do maybe a 3-finger pinch and half more, and you can always add more, so I would recommend at this point to just go ahead and whisk that sugar in, give it a minute or so, so it melts and it melds into the flavor profile of the soup. I'm gonna whisk it like so. And that should be, this soup is almost there, guys. Alright, so coming with my spoon. Taste it one more time. That tastes really good. Alright, so our last step will be to take some of the heavy whipping cream you got in your kit. I'm trying to pour about 1.5 ounces in there. Nothing too much. The cream is bringing a lot of fat in here, and it's going to make the soup be velvety. Okay, sometimes we can finish this soup by just whisking in a couple of cubes of butter. If I was doing this in a restaurant, I would definitely do that, but I would do that last minute right before we serve it. That way we can take this soup to the next level. Okay. Now, I believe this soup is pretty much there now. Yep. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the soup, move it to the side, and then I have the remainder of sour cream right here. Okay. And to this sour cream, I'm going to add a little bit of allspice, a little bit of cinnamon, a bit of ginger. I'm doubling the ginger here as well. I'm going to do a 3-finger pinch of sugar in here. Okay? And then I'm going to take a little tiny bit of cream and pour it in here just to thin out the sour cream. Okay? And then we can mix the sour cream and all the spices. To create a seasoned crema. Okay. It should look like cinnamon icing when you're doing it, just like so. Okay. At this point, we're pretty much there. Have a bowl. Quick clean up here. Have some soup. You can ladle it out if you like, or you can pour it in. I have this style bowl. It's kind of homey, so I have no problem pouring it in. But if you're not comfortable with that, just take a ladle and scoop it in. And then I'm going to take a dollop of this cinnamon crema and just put it right in there. And you slowly let that melt into the soup. And we have a roasted butternut squash soup with cinnamon crema.